Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. The Novelization by Jeffrey Cooper. Chapter 8. Carrie Miller gazed at the gorgeous hunk swimming beside her in Lisa Paletti's oversized swimming pool inside. Carrie knew that Lisa's parents had promised to go inside early tonight and leave her friends alone to party, but so far the Palettis were showing no signs of an early departure. Lisa's dad was still busy flipping hamburgers and hot dogs at the gas grill, wearing that ridiculous chef's hat and the Kiss the Cook apron that he always wore on these occasions. The speakers were blaring one of those goofy Benny Goodman records that Mr. Paletti always insisted on playing at his daughter's parties. "What's a party without the King of Swing?" Carrie once heard him ask in all seriousness, and the lights around the pool were much too bright for the kind of partying that Carrie had in mind. Lisa's mother gave her husband a sharp look as she stepped out of the house carrying a huge platter brimming with salads and condiments. Mr. Paletti pretended not to notice, but he knew that soon he would have to abandon his watchful post at the barbecue and leave the kids alone. Things had certainly changed since he was a young man. He didn't remember the bathing suits being quite that skimpy or the girls being quite so shapely whenever he was Lisa's age. And these boys, Lisa knew, wow, half of them looked more like full-grown men than high school kids. There was something about the way these kids horsed around together that made Mr. Paletti very reluctant to go inside and leave this group of overactive teenagers unsupervised. It was finally left to Mrs. Paletti to take her husband by the arm and forcefully remove him from the premises. With the greatest reluctance, the man in the oversized chef's hat turned over his spatula to one of the more responsible-looking boys before following Lisa's mother toward the house. "We're going to bed now, dear," Mrs. Paletti informed her daughter while Mr. Paletti scowled at a muscular young man who was busy showing off his biceps to a couple of giggling girls in very skimpy bikinis. "Thanks, Mom," said Lisa. 12:30, said her father in his sternest voice as he glanced at his watch. "Not 1 minute later." 12:30, agreed Lisa. "I promise." "And don't forget to lock the gate," shouted Mr. Paletti as his wife literally pulled him into the house. "Good night, Daddy," said Lisa. She smiled as her parents disappeared behind the sliding glass doors. She knew he meant well, but sometimes her father could be a real pain in the ass. The responsible-looking boy with the spatula was thinking the same thing as he watched the Palettis go inside. He waited until he saw the lights go off upstairs before giving the prearranged signal to the girl waiting next to the cassette machine. Suddenly, Benny Goodman was gone, and the hard-rocking sounds of Van Halen were blasted through the speakers. "Party time!" announced a boy standing at the side of the house. He flicked off most of the lights around the pool while somebody pulled a wagon loaded with beer out of the bushes. Carrie waited until the underwater lights went off before slipping off her bikini top and pressing her young body against the hunk in the swimming pool. All around the pool, boys and girls were beginning to pair off, their hands and mouths eagerly exploring each other's bodies in the warm, dark night. Jesse Walsh sat by himself in a lounge chair at the far corner of the patio, with a troubled expression on his face. By the time Lisa pushed her way through the crowd of dancing teenagers, whose writhing bodies blocked her way, Jesse had disappeared into the portable cabana at the edge of the pool. Lisa knocked on the door and called his name. Just a minute." Jesse slipped on his pants and shirt before opening the door. Lisa walked in and shut the door behind her. "I think I'd better go, Lise," said Jesse, avoiding Lisa's eyes as he buttoned up his shirt. "I'm just not into it tonight." "Do you want to talk about it?" Lisa rested her hand gently on his back, but he shook it off and stepped away. "Just leave me alone," he said. "Please." "You're not being fair," said Lisa, joining Jesse on the wooden bench as he sat down to put on his shoes. "I'm worried about you, Jesse. I want to help you get through this thing." "What are you going to do? How can anybody help me?" He looked at her with terrified eyes. "I'm going crazy, Lisa, and I don't want to have you watch me falling apart." "It's okay, Jesse," the girl said, her hand on his shoulder. "I don't know what to do," he said, clutching Lisa's hand tightly in his own. "I'm afraid to go to sleep, and I'm afraid to stay awake. I don't know what's going to happen to me, Lisa." "We'll figure it out together," said Lisa. "We'll stay up all night if we have to. I won't let anything happen to you, I promise." He looked into her eyes and she kissed him gently on the mouth. Then she kissed him again, only this time the kiss was a little harder. Jesse put his arms around Lisa and pulled her close. Their lips parted now, their mouths pressed together as they held each other tight. Jesse slipped off his shirt and felt the warmth of Lisa's flesh against his bare chest. Without speaking a word, they slid slowly but deliberately onto the floor of Lisa's cabana. Without speaking a word, they slid slowly but deliberately onto the cabana floor, deliciously lost in their boundless passion. Jesse felt Lisa's hand opening the snap on his jeans, sliding open the zipper as he kissed her on the gentle swell of breast that rose over the top of her swimsuit. Lisa closed her eyes, breathing hard, as Jesse reached around to open the small hook at the back of her suit. It was at that moment that Jesse saw the long, thick tongue dart out of his mouth, wriggling wildly in the air for just a moment before flicking back inside. "What's wrong?" asked Lisa as Jesse pushed himself away and jumped to his feet. "I have to go," he said, hastily tucking in his shirt. Lisa was still on the floor, looking very confused, as Jesse zipped up his jeans and ran out of the cabana. Ron Grady was fast asleep when he felt the hand clamp down over his mouth. The light clicked on to reveal the disheveled figure of Jesse Walsh. "Jesus Christ," said Grady, glancing at the open bedroom window as he shook off Jesse's hand. "You scared the shit out of me, dude." "Sorry," said Jesse. "I didn't know where else to go. You have to let me stay here tonight." Grady looked at the clock on his night table and shook his head. "No, this is important," Jesse continued. "Something really weird is happening. It started out just like bad dreams, but it's starting to get really serious." "Go home," said Grady, feeling very tired and cranky. "Take a sleeping pill or something and call me in the morning." He flopped back on the bed and threw one arm over his eyes. "As a matter of fact, why don't you do the world a favor and take a whole bottle?" Jesse sat on the edge of the bed and yanked Grady's arm away from his face. "I killed Snyder," he said. Grady opened his eyes and stared at Jesse in disbelief. "Oh, only it wasn't me," Jesse continued. "I was there, but it was like something moving around inside of me. Then last night it made me go into my sister's room, and tonight with Lisa." He paused, trying to remember exactly what had happened. "We were on the floor in the cabana, and He stopped abruptly and grabbed Grady by the shoulder. "It wanted to kill them," he said, suddenly realizing what the horrible transformation had been all about. Grady stared at him for a long time before offering his own analysis of the situation. "You're fucked in the head," he said. "I'm scared, Grady," said Jesse, oblivious to the other boy's skepticism. I know it sounds crazy, but there's something trying to get into my body." Grady shook his head and grinned lewdly. "The only thing trying to get into your body is female and waiting for you on a cabana floor, dude, and you want to sleep with me? Huh, go figure." "Look," said Jesse, "I don't care if you believe me or not." "I believe you. You had some scary dreams, right?" "No!" Jesse shook his head, no longer certain of what to believe. "I don't know. Everything's all mixed up. The important thing is that I'm in trouble and I need your help." Grady looked at Jesse and sighed. Trouble was something he understood. "What do you want me to do?" "Just watch me," said Jesse. "If anything weird happens, like if I have a nightmare or I start walking in my sleep, you have to bring me out of it. Hit me over the head if you have to, just don't let me leave." Grady started to crack wise, but thought better of it. Instead, he just nodded in agreement. And whatever you do, Grady," Jesse added, settling himself into the chair next to the bed, "for God's sake, man, don't fall asleep." Right, said Grady, turning on the TV with his remote control. He was watching for less than half an hour when he became aware of Jesse's soft snoring at his side. "Sweet dreams, buddy," Grady whispered as he turned off the TV. He watched Jesse sleeping peacefully for a moment and thought about what the boy had told him. It took Grady less than a minute to decide that only a real jerk would take Jesse's crazy story seriously. He turned off the light and pulled the cover up over his shoulders to settle in for a good night's sleep. And then Jesse's eyes snapped open. "It's happening again," he said, flinging himself out of the chair and onto the floor. Grady was on his feet in an instant, but he didn't know what to do for the boy who was now twisting and writhing on his bedroom floor, clutching his stomach and flailing about in unbearable agony. Grady had never seen anyone throw a fit, but he knew that Jesse was suffering something far more intense than any ordinary seizure. From the look on his face, Grady guessed that Jesse felt like someone strapped into an electric chair at the moment the switch is thrown. "Jesse?" he said, feeling more helpless and frustrated than he ever had before in his life. But Jesse just rolled silently on the floor, his body contorted as if every fiber of his being were undergoing some excruciating transformation. Then slowly he raised his right hand, his fingers extended and spread far apart. Grady watched in horror as 4 razor-sharp blades emerged from within the tips of Jesse's fingers, like new teeth breaking through a baby's gums. Then, as if some crazed beast were tearing its way through his flesh, Jesse's skin began peeling away. Suddenly, his chest literally burst open as countless capillaries exploded in the air, a fine spray of blood forming a hazy crimson cloud around the figure that once was Jesse Walsh. And out of that cloud stepped a man in a filthy red and green sweater, an evil grin on the disfigured face beneath his battered fedora. For just one moment, Grady would have sworn that he saw Jesse's tormented expression covering the man's face like some obscene Halloween mask. Grady made a quick break for the door, but his speed was no match for that of the creature in the dirty sweater. Lifting Grady by the throat, he cackled wickedly while the boy struggled in vain to free himself from the monster's iron grip. Grady's parents were already at the door, pounding on the outside, while their son hung helplessly in the air on the other side. The Gradys were still trying to break the door down when they heard the first of their son's screams. They jumped back as 4 sharp and reddened blades ripped through the wooden door, the blood of Ron Grady oozing from the knife holes as if the door itself were bleeding. The blades wiggled free and then pierced the door again as Ron Grady screamed for the last time, his vital organs already shredded beyond any hope of repair. Inside the room, the man in the red and green sweater released his victim, watching as the boy's mutilated body slid lifelessly to the floor in a pool of his own blood. And then Jesse looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw the evil face of Freddy Krueger leering back at him. "You son of a bitch!" he shouted, pulling the blood-drenched glove off his hand and hurling it at the mirror with all his might. "You killed him!" The mirror cracked, but the face in the mirror was still laughing maniacally as Jesse fled screaming into the night. Chapter 9. Lisa's party was still going strong when Jesse staggered to the Paletti's front door. "Oh my God!" said Lisa as Jesse collapsed in her arms, his clothes torn and dirty and covered with blood. "I killed him!" said Jesse, still trying to make sense of it. "I killed them both!" Lisa held him tightly in her arms as the tears rushed to his eyes. "I killed Grady!" he said. "I killed Grady! And I killed Schneider, too, don't you see?" he said, his damp eyes widening with the horror of it. "The bastard is inside of me!" "What are you talking about, Jesse? Who's inside you?" "He's just waiting to take me," Jesse said, still gasping for breath after the long run from Grady's house. "He gets me when I fall asleep, don't you see?" "Who, Jesse?" Lisa persisted. "Who's waiting to get you?" "Krueger!" he said, spitting out the name like some foul curse. Fred Krueger's been trying to get a hold of me ever since I moved here. He needs me to get out of his world and into ours. He's been using me all along, and he's gonna use me again." "This isn't happening," said Lisa, looking Jesse hard in the eye and trying to make him understand the absurdity of what he was saying. "This isn't happening, Jesse. You're just confused. It's Snyder and the glove and the diary." "No!" he shouted, pushing her away in frustration. "You don't understand what I'm telling you. He tried to make me kill Angela last night. Look at my hands." He held out his bloody hands and started to cry again. "I killed Grady," he repeated, trying desperately to make sense out of all the insanity. And then he realized the horrible truth. "He owns me," he said, staring at Lisa with eyes suddenly drained of all hope. But Lisa was not prepared to surrender. She took him to her arms and held him close, stroking his wild hair as she spoke. "Nobody's going to take you from me," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. "There's got to be a logical explanation for everything. Jesse, all we have to do is figure it out." Then she remembered something Nancy Thompson had written. "Wait a minute," she said, leading Jesse into the study. She reached into a desk drawer and pulled out the red leather-bound diary. "Listen to this," she said, flipping to the last entry. "He is evil itself," she read, her voice trembling with excitement. "I know now that I brought him into my world. We all did. Our screams gave him all the energy he needed. Now I'll take it back. Now I will deny him his energy." Lisa closed the book and held it up for Jesse to see. "Nancy wasn't crazy. All of this really happened." Jesse shook his head from side to side, unable to absorb whatever it was that Lisa was trying to tell him. "It's true," Lisa said. "You can fight him. Remember what I said about good energy and bad energy? Fred Krueger is bad energy. He thrives on our anger and our hatred and our fear. All we have to do is stop being afraid of him." Jesse was about to ask how they were supposed to do that when he suddenly felt the sharp pain in his stomach. "He's coming back!" he gasped, clutching his middle. "Get out of here, Lisa!" At that moment, every window in the house slammed shut and locked. The deadbolt on the front door slid into place with a loud snap. "Fight it, Jesse!" said Lisa, struggling not to be swallowed up by her own fear. Upstairs, Mr. Paletti sat up with a start as the latch on the bedroom door snapped shut. The temperature in the study had risen to well over 100 degrees. Lisa's clothes clung to her sweat-soaked body as she watched Jesse rolling in agony on the floor. "You created him," she said, shaking the boy and trying to make him understand. "You can destroy him. He lives off your fear, Jesse. You can fight him." "I can't," said Jesse, gasping for breath as Freddy struggled to push his way out. In the living room, the water in the aquarium had begun to bubble. 3 poached angelfish floated lifelessly to the surface. Outside, Carrie was surprised to see a steamy mist rising from the surface of the swimming pool. Across the patio, a tray full of hot dogs had suddenly burst into flames. Moments later, the bulbs in the Japanese lanterns around the pool began to explode. A couple who tried to escape discovered that someone had padlocked the iron gate around the patio. "You can't be afraid of him!" Lisa screamed as Jesse writhed on the floor. "The bastard doesn't even exist!" But even as she spoke, she saw the 4 razor-sharp blades that were gouging deep channels on the edge of the desk to which Jesse was clinging. The water in the aquarium came to a boil. The glass shattered, flooding the living room carpet with steaming water and dead fish. Then the TV came on for just a second before the picture tube exploded. "Damn door's jammed shut," Mr. Paletti told his wife, yanking on the doorknob. The clock radio at the side of the bed had slowly begun to melt. Meanwhile, the water in the swimming pool had reached the simmering point, and choppy waves were breaking against the sides of the pool. Carrie and her new boyfriend were trying to climb to safety, but they were driven back by the hot, stormy waters. Tears were streaming down Carrie's face as she felt her skin begin to blister in the heat.
"He can't fight me,"
Freddy told Lisa, rising from the floor with a look of triumph on his horribly scarred face.
"I'm Jesse now."
And then the creature in the red and green sweater was on his feet, his finger knives gleaming in the lamplight. The awful glove swung toward Lisa, but the girl countered by catching the blades in the woolen afghan she snatched from the back of her mother's favorite chair. Before Freddy could plan his next attack, she lifted the heavy brass lamp from the top of the desk and brought it down over his head. As he stumbled backward, bellowing with rage, Lisa ran out of the study and slammed the door shut behind her. "Jesse!" she shouted, reaching the front door only to discover that it was locked from the outside. She turned to run the other way and collided with the charging figure of Fred Krueger. While Lisa lay on the floor catching her breath, Freddy grabbed her by the foot and sank his sharp teeth into her bare calf. Lisa screamed in pain and kicked him hard in the head with her other foot. She rolled away just as he brought down his steel talons, escaping to the kitchen while Freddy struggled to free his weapon from the oak floor in which it was now embedded. Searching frantically through the kitchen, Lisa had succeeded in locating some weapons of her own. As Freddy burst into the room, she grabbed the heaviest and sharpest knife in her parents' collection of gourmet cutlery. "Help me, Jesse!" she called, the 14-inch butcher's knife clenched tightly in her fist.
"I said, I'm Jesse now,"
repeated Freddy, raising his own sharp blades and clicking them menacingly in the air. He smiled at the girl as if to acknowledge that she had put up a good fight. Lisa shook her head slowly from side to side, struggling to find the courage to drive her knife deep into the monster's heart. And then she saw the change in Freddy's expression.
"Kill me,"
he pleaded.
"Please."
The voice coming from the creature's mouth slowly became Jesse Walsh's. Lisa stepped back and lowered the knife. Suddenly, a wicked grin came over Freddy's face, and the hoarse voice that issued from his twisted lips was once again his own.
"Go ahead, Lisa,"
he croaked.
"Kill him! Kill him good!"
He stepped forward, and Lisa swung her knife at him. Freddy laughed and jumped back, the blade just inches from his chest. He attacked again, and this time Lisa drove her knife deep into the monster's shoulder. And now she was filled with rage, hating this grotesque beast for all the pain and suffering he had caused. Again and again she plunged her knife into Freddy's retreating form, slowly driving him back across the room. Then he spoke to her, his voice again that of Jesse. "Lisa," he said. "Lisa, I love you." She was crying now, her knife raised high as tears streamed down her cheeks. And then Freddy grabbed her wrist and Lisa knew that Jesse was gone. The knife fell from her hand as the monster tightened his grip, his own glistening blades raised high for the kill. "Please, God," she whispered, her eyes shut tight as she prepared to die. And then she opened her eyes and saw Freddy staring at her with a look that was more to be pitied than feared. They stood there for what felt like an eternity, before the creature suddenly released her wrist and tossed her aside.
"No!"
he shouted in a tortured voice that was not quite Jesse's, but not quite Freddy's either. Lisa was still lying where the creature had thrown her when he let out a scream of unbearable pain and flung himself through the glass patio door. And as the glass shattered into 1,000 shimmering pieces, Freddy Krueger disappeared. Meanwhile, the swimming pool ceased its violent swirling. Coughing and trembling, Carrie and her boyfriend climbed out, never before so happy just to be on dry land. Upstairs, the latch on the bedroom door snapped open. Mr. and Mrs. Paletti stepped into the hallway to breathe the cool, fresh air. The temperature throughout the house had dropped to a tolerable level almost as abruptly as it had risen. There was a long moment of silent relief as life suddenly returned to normal. And then the ground below the patio began to shake and rumble, and the horrible figure of Fred Krueger came crashing up from beneath the concrete. Lisa's friends screamed in terror as the sky suddenly darkened and the waters once again began to churn and boil. Freddy was laughing maniacally, his finger knives raised high as he grabbed kids at random and tossed them kicking and screaming into the boiling waters. Boys and girls were running in every direction as Freddy lashed out wildly with his fingers of death. The patio was soon drenched with blood, and Lisa's guests began stumbling over the fallen bodies of their slashed and bloody friends in their desperate attempts to escape. Those who attempted to climb the chain-link fence surrounding the pool quickly discovered that the fence had turned as untouchably hot as the shrubbery that was bursting into flames at the side of the house. His dark eyes gleaming with evil joy, Freddy lifted one of the boys high over his head, swinging him in the air before sending him flying into the gas grill with a bone-shattering crash. A huge tongue of flame shot high into the air as Freddy gleefully slashed out at his helpless victims.
"You're all my children now,"
Freddy said, his arms raised high overhead in triumph. Suddenly, a shotgun blast rang out from the living room, shattering the bowl of potato salad at Freddy's side. Several teenagers ducked for cover as Mr. Paletti raised his pump-action shotgun again and prepared to blow Fred Krueger's head off. "No!" screamed Lisa, knocking the barrel of the gun off target as the second shell exploded harmlessly into the cabana wall. "What the hell are you doing?" demanded Mr. Paletti, glaring angrily at his daughter. But Lisa was not looking at her father. Lisa was staring at the creature in the red and green sweater, who now studied her with an odd expression, halfway between utter contempt and undying gratitude. And then the sky lightened and the water stopped churning as the creature turned away and walked effortlessly through a brick wall. "Where the hell did he go?" asked Mr. Paletti, looking down only long enough to reload his shotgun. Lisa knew, but she didn't answer. By the time her father looked up, the girl was already gone. Chapter 10. The hardest part of Lisa's trip to the old powerhouse was getting Jessie's Falcon to start. Once she found the right wires to twist together and the right switches to throw in the makeshift car, it was relatively simple to wend her way along the twisted unlit roads that led to the abandoned generating plant. Lisa had no idea how the man in the red and green sweater would manage to transport himself to his beloved boiler room, but she knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that he would be there when she arrived. It was not until she pulled up to the building and shut off the engine that the wound in her leg began to throb. Lisa tore a strip of cloth from her shirt and wrapped it tightly around her calf where Freddy had bitten her before stepping out of the car. A pair of wild dogs blocked the entrance to the powerhouse. The beasts growled deep in their throats as Lisa approached, and she could see the thick string of saliva that hung down from the powerful jaws beneath their sharp teeth. "I'm not afraid," Lisa said aloud, forcing herself to believe her own words as she approached the heavy iron door. The growls turned to threatening barks as the dogs began snapping at Lisa's hands. "I said I'm not afraid," she said again, ignoring the vicious beasts and passing through unharmed. She was in the power plant now, but the huge building looked vastly different than it had on her previous visit with Jessie. This time the old pipes were alive with steam that leaked out from between rusty rivets and torn gaskets, and there was a constant pounding noise as the ancient expansion tanks steadily belched their rancid air. The room seemed bathed in an eerie blue light, and white-hot arcs of electricity flashed intermittently in the distant corners of the building. Lisa wondered how much of what she saw was illusion, and how much was real. Touching her fingers to a large steam pipe, she quickly discovered that the heat of the pipes was very real indeed. It suddenly occurred to her how lucky she had been to guess right about the wild dogs outside. Lisa was studying her blistered fingers when she noticed that her injured leg had begun to ache. She casually reached down to rub the wound and felt something move on her fingers. Lisa looked down to find her makeshift bandage swarming with big, black carpenter ants. She screamed and, quaking with disgust, began brushing the ants away with both hands. And then, as abruptly as they had appeared, the ants were gone. Lisa stared at her blood-soaked bandage for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued her voyage into the bowels of the old boiler room. She was halfway up the rusted iron stairway leading to the catwalk when she thought she heard the horrible sound of metal scraping against metal. She whirled around, prepared for the worst. There was no one there. She continued to climb until she reached the walkway. There to greet her was the same giant rat she and Jessie had encountered on their previous visit. It fixed her with its evil red eyes and showed its pointy teeth. "I'm not afraid," she said, but this time she didn't believe her own words. The vicious creature who was about to leap at her was no illusion. And then a large black cat appeared from nowhere and pounced on the unsuspecting rat. The cat stared at Lisa with strange yellow eyes as it slowly devoured the rat, the rodent's tail protruding obscenely from its mouth, while it slowly munched on the rat with loud bone-crunching noises. Lisa felt herself on the verge of throwing up as she watched the rat's long tail slowly slide past the cat's pink lips and down its gullet. The cat chomped on its prey one more time, swallowed noisily, and then growled its satisfaction with a roar befitting a small mountain lion. Lisa gazed into the creature's demonic eyes for a moment and knew for sure that this was no ordinary pussycat. This was a pussycat that could devour a teenage girl as easily as it had consumed the rat. She turned and ran, her footsteps clanging noisily on the steel mesh flooring. She felt the catwalk begin to give way beneath her feet and grabbed hold of the iron handrail. Lisa was breathing hard now as she jumped to safety, running fast without knowing where she was going or what she would find when she got there. And then she saw Freddy Krueger and began to scream.
You had your chance,
he said, raising high his taloned glove.
Now you die!
Lisa ducked just in time as the finger knife slashed out and scraped horribly against a steam pipe. She turned to run and saw that the walkway was now glowing, a steamy mist rising from its red-hot surface. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide.
Come to me, Lisa,
Freddy croaked, a twisting smile on his ugly face.
I'm waiting for you!
Stop him, Jessie!
Cried Lisa, fighting back her tears. I know you're in there!
I told you! Jessie's dead!
Said the monster, stepping closer as he clicked his fingerknives in Lisa's face.
Freddy's here!
Lisa took a step back, but it was of no use. She felt the sting as Freddy struck out, his blades just nicking the flesh of her shoulder.
Jessie!
She screamed, trying desperately not to lose her faith.
Wanna join your little friend?
Said Freddy. Lisa smelled the creature's foul breath and almost puked for the second time that day.
Where's Jessie?
She demanded, forcing herself to sound more brave than she actually felt.
There is no Jess. I'm Jessie now!
I want him back,
she insisted.
Talk to me, Jessie! Jessie!
Freddy just laughed. Shaking his ugly head slowly from side to side, he raised his steel blades to Lisa's face, the sharp points almost touching her eyes. Lisa forced herself to look beyond the deadly blades, summoning all of her remaining strength and courage to look directly into the creature's fearsome eyes. I love you, Jessie, meaning it as she had never meant anything before in her life. The monster stared at her, a look of doubt and confusion in his cat-like eyes. His hand began to tremble slightly. He shifted his gaze to the glove on his right hand, as if he weren't quite sure how it got there. And then he began to bleed. He was bleeding from the same shoulder and chest wounds that had refused to bleed when Lisa inflicted them back at the house. Now they were gushing, and Freddy stared in disbelief as blood poured down his chest and arms. Then the look of disbelief changed to one of weakness and pain as the bloody creature staggered back to lean against the iron railing. Lisa dashed past him. She was about to run for safety when she heard Jesse's voice calling her name.
Lisa,
he said,
come and get me.
She turned around and heard the ugly sound of Freddy's wicked laughter.
Come and get him! Come and get him! Lisa, come and get him!
Freddy croaked and teased, clicking his finger knives in the air, still leaning against the railing for support. Lisa stepped toward him, suddenly more angry than frightened. The time for playing cat and mouse games had come to an end.
I'm not afraid of you,
she said, looking the bloody creature straight in the eye.
You couldn't kill Angela, and you can't kill me. Jesse's in there, and I want him back.
Jesse's dead! Jesse's dead!
Screamed Freddy, sounding less sure of himself than before.
I sliced him good! I sliced him real good!
Lisa just shook her head and took another step closer.
I'm gonna take him away from you, and you're going straight back to hell, bastard!
He's dead!
Freddy screamed, but Lisa just went on shaking her head.
Come back to me, Jesse,
she said, her eyes looking right through Freddy's.
I love you. I love you.
Freddy dropped to one knee as Lisa moved closer.
I'll kill you,
croaked Freddy, but there was no conviction left in his voice. His blades clicked weakly at his side.
He can't hold you, Jesse,
said Lisa, ignoring Freddy's threats.
He's losing his grip. You can get out if you want to.
He'll die with me,
Freddy muttered, but Lisa just shook her head and knelt beside him.
He'll die with both of us,
said Freddy, as the girl took off his hat and began to stroke his head. Freddy lifted his right hand and pressed his glove against Lisa's chest. She felt the painful sting of the blades, but made no move to escape. Instead, she came in closer and touched her lips to his. The creature flinched and moved his talons to her back, but he was too weak to drive the blades home. He shivered as she embraced him, her mouth now pressed against his in a passionate, life-confirming kiss. And then smoke began to rise from his body, and he pushed her away with a scream of excruciating agony. The noise of the ancient machinery was deafening now as the temperature in the room began to soar. Suddenly, a flame shot across the railing against which Freddy leaned, and small fires broke out along the catwalk. The paint on the walls began to bubble and peel as pipes everywhere started to burst. Valve wheels flew off and rolled noisily down the flaming catwalks. Steam shot out from every punctured pipe as the entire boiler room filled with smoke and flame. Lisa watched in mute horror as Freddy's flesh began to melt, his pain-racked features sliding off his exposed skull like wax dripping off a candle. And then he was on fire, his dense, all-engulfing flame becoming one with the fire that was rapidly consuming the entire powerhouse. And just as suddenly, the fires began to die out. In a matter of moments, the deafening noise began to abate, and the smoke cleared. Big fires turned to little fires, which soon died down to harmless clouds of sooty smoke. A cool blue light suffused the vast boiler room. Lisa looked at the charred and smoldering corpse of Freddy Krueger and gasped. The blackened body had begun to stir. Then the creature turned to her, but the singed and sooty figure that slowly rose to its knees was not the fiendish Freddy Krueger at all. Jesse Walsh rose to his feet, his eyes glazed as if he were awakening at long last from a horrible and vaguely remembered nightmare. Jesse kissed his mom goodbye just as the shiny new school bus pulled up to the curb. His right arm was in a sling, and he still had some minor burns and bruises, but he was feeling about as good as he had ever felt in his life. Jesse hurried onto the bus and saw Lisa waving at him from the back. A grin on his face, he made his way quickly down the aisle, shaking a hand or two as he greeted his admiring schoolmates. "Hi," he said, giving Lisa a quick kiss before sitting down beside her. He draped his good arm around the girl's shoulder, careful to avoid the bandage that covered her still healing wound. Lisa returned his greeting and then chuckled. "What's so funny?" asked Jesse. "We must look like a couple of escapees from a veterans hospital," said Lisa with a smile. Jesse laughed and shook his head. "I still can't believe that we actually—" Lisa cut him off in mid-sentence by putting a finger gently to his lips. He nodded in agreement. Some things are better left unspoken. "I love you," said Jesse. "I love you too," she said, gazing deeply into his eyes. They hugged, and Jesse's lips gently nuzzled the girl's ear. Then they looked at each other again, and Lisa closed her eyes. This is what it's all about, thought Jesse, as he leaned forward to kiss her tenderly on the lips. And at that moment, the taloned glove of Freddy Krueger ripped through Lisa's chest and thrust its razor-sharp blades toward Jesse's eyes. Jesse was still screaming as the bus shifted into high gear, racing madly into the desert with flashing lights and sparking dashboard as the nightmare continued.
Okay, Slashaholics, this has been A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge.
The Novelization by Jeffrey Cooper. Hope you've all have enjoyed this novelization of the movie. It was pretty much a carbon copy of the film itself. It didn't have a bunch of differences like Part 3 did. I did notice a few slight differences though, but nothing major, you know. This movie, the movie Nightmare 2, it's not my least favorite in the series. It's probably about mid-tier somewhere, closer to the end. But I don't hate the movie. It just changes all the roles. It's like the redheaded stepchild of the series. Really, this book has a lot more in common with the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books. Because in those books, it's Freddy possessing somebody in every book. I've done one of those on the channel. I'm going to be doing the other 5 very soon. Awesome author David Bergantino wrote 4 of them out of the 6, and he'll jump on, do an intro and stuff, and he'll join us on the podcast whenever we talk about each of those Tales of Terror books in that young adult series. I gotta know though, how did Jesse not get arrested? I mean, he had to leave DNA behind and stuff. At the end, he's all like happy. Well, it is a nightmare at the end, so I guess he could technically be in a jail cell somewhere having this nightmare about Freddy's glove coming out of Lisa's chest and then the bus taking off. Or, like Part 1, maybe the entire movie was just a nightmare that Freddy was putting him through for fun before killing him. Huh. That was always one of my biggest questions is, you know, how did he get away with it? You'd think he would have left DNA killing Grady, killing Schneider. Either that or they would have found Freddy Krueger's DNA. But yeah, maybe he is in a jail cell or, sleeping, or maybe this whole thing was a nightmare. Anyways, man, I just don't know what I can really say more about Freddy's Revenge. If you listen to this in the playlist form, like whenever I put the 2 to 3 chapters up per upload, you know I had a few things to say in the commentary at the end of each of those uploads. but not much, not as much as I usually do, because there's really not a lot to say. We all know this movie. Very strange that it's the whole possession angle thing. A big difference from part 1. But I do like how this is our first visit to the real boiler room. The book didn't really fill in, the stuff at the party. We're not going to hurt you, that whole scene. I was kind of disappointed that wasn't thrown in. And I gotta say, I was disappointed kind of that the dogs didn't have little human baby faces, that creepy. It just wasn't there, it's just normal dogs. So a lot of the weird stuff from the movie didn't make it into the book, but there was a few slight differences. So this isn't my favorite novelization so far, but it's not my least favorite out of all the books I've done by a long stretch. Let me know what you guys and gals thought of this book in the comment section below, and I'll be back very soon with more slasher mayhem on the 80 Slasher Librarian YouTube channel. Come on into the 80 Slasher Library. Stay as long as you want. We got a huge selection of slasher, novelizations, tie-ins, whatever you're looking for. Just be careful, because as you know,
in this library, the late fees are a killer! Ha ha ha!
Have a good night, everybody, and don't forget, this is your friendly neighborhood 80 Slasher Librarian saying thanks for listening, and
pleasant dreams!